No distraction.
No distraction. Everything's distracting. My phone is there, that's there, everything is horrible and distracting. The world has become so distracting. It's awful.
No, it's the most distraction for you.
Well, this is also distracting. This is not like properly formatted, and this is going to be in the outtakes for sure.
Let's more energy. Should be more energy. What?
I know that's an icon on there.
Welcome to TableDropZone. My name is Loc.
And my name is Holger.
And today we'll tell you about how to set up the table for wargaming in general and for Battletech in specific.
Exactly. So here's how you do it. Done.
Cut.
Cut and over.
Not that easy.
So you can of course always take random shapes, wooden blocks or something that you have at home, just throw them on the table and start playing. However, today the idea is that we will give you a couple of concepts and ideas, templates you can use for different war games. We are going to use Battletech only as an example, that kind of balance a game in a certain way and speed up a game or slow down a game in a certain way. We're going to rate these and we're going to give you the pros and cons for each of these so that you can use these, adapt these to your terrain and your ideas and your table size, and maybe, you know, come up with some good games using these.
So with that, let's start. Let's start with the role of different types of terrain. First of all is the last piece of terrain. It should block the line of sight. And to make it more interesting, there's some parts will be a battle cover, and they are the basic for the setup of your table. And you should put it first, and to make the concept of how the table will look like. Next, I will talk about the scattered terrains. It's used to add cover and hurdle in the area that have been left barren by the last pieces. So you will put it by the last part of the setup among all the last piece of terrain, and it will be mostly like a partial cover, but you can add also like fully cover for the certain angle of the terrains. And next one is forest. Forest is very good way to hide and sneak, and it's very progressive cover. It's a very good to use for slowing down the game when you feel that the game is very aggressive, very fast and aggressive. Then you will put some forest to make the game slower, but don't put too many forests because we make the game stop. And last one is water body. Water bodies is aggressive terrain that allow mechs to deal with more damage without penalty, and it can put a mech in very dominant position. Therefore, you should not have it behind the cover, and it should be a rework and in a hard to reach and defend position.
Let's talk about the way we rate terrain. First of all, we are going to talk about what kind of mech type is preferred by each terrain. So is it a light mech who can move fast, or is it a heavy mech who can take much damage, or something in between? This is the first type of rating. The second one is the amount of terrain pieces needed. Different terrains will require vastly different amounts of pieces, of separate pieces that you need to put on the table. Also different types of pieces. Then we're going to talk about the game flow. There's roughly 3 categories of game flows. The first one is fluent. Fluent means that pretty much every action you do can have a reaction from your opponent, and no action is ever considered to be quote-unquote unrealistic, or if you would call it like dumb. You would not have to sacrifice one of your mechs, for example, usually in order to keep the game running. And second one is choppy. Choppy means that from time to time the setup may require that you either get a deadlock where nothing moves anymore, or it's just not very interesting for a player to move one of his mechs unless he wants to sacrifice it. And the last one is locked. Locked means that there is a very high possibility that the mechs will just not be moved at all, because every move would essentially doom a mech, so why would anyone do this? So the only way to keep the game flowing is to actually sacrifice a mech or do something a normal player would not do. The next one is game speed. This essentially determines how fast you may experience the game. The first one is slow. Slow means that maybe even for the first 2 rounds you will likely not be firing that many shots. Generally in the game you will likely not be firing that many shots because it takes time until the mechs see each other, and then you never have big amounts of mechs seeing each other under normal circumstances. Then there's medium. Medium means that there are quite few shooting possibilities, and the game will evolve quite naturally and quickly. So usually that means maybe in round 1 you get 1 or 2 shots off, and in round 2 pretty much every mech is able to hit something. And then there's fast, which is pretty much the unrelenting non-stop action, where you can really expect a high damage output, and here typically from round 1 onwards pretty much every mech can have something to shoot at, and these games typically also end quite quickly. The last thing we're going to talk about is immersiveness. Immersiveness is essentially how good does this look. So the idea is it really like a very naturally looking environment where I can fully understand and feel myself into, or am I looking at a board game? Right? This is an important factor because a beautifully looking game board also is just more fun to play in. Right? You feel more like a general commanding an army than like a chess player moving around the standardized pieces. Right? So here the high level of immersion stands for a very believable look where the players can be fully invested in. The medium level of immersion will mean it's somewhat believable, but it already looks, it's a bit gamified already. And then the low level of immersion is essentially your game of chess, right? It's the board game, the very abstract version. Yeah, that's all for the rating.
Yeah.
Let's look at the types of setup.
Type setup, yeah.
So the first type of setup we will talk about is what I call the mountain. The mountain is characterized by essentially having a lot of high and vision blocking terrain in the center, and around it you're going to arrange a few pieces of scattered terrain. The hotspots, that means where most of the battles will happen, will very typically be at the top or the bottom of the mountain. Mechs will try to avoid climbing the mountain because this makes them slower and puts them potentially in line of sight of other mechs. The amount of terrain you need for this is, I would say, medium. You do need a couple of pieces to make the mountain center happen, but aside from that there's not much else that you need to add. However, the game speed is rather slow because the mechs will need to find a way around the mountain or have to climb, which slows them down. The game flow itself is going to be a bit choppy. This is due to the fact that the mechs will try to hide behind scatter terrain and set traps for each other on the top or the bottom part of the mountain, and only a few will attempt the climb, and even those are probably going to be a bit careful about what they're doing up there. The immersiveness, however, is quite high because such a structure could be happening in reality, so this is a good part. This type of setup prefers fast mechs because there's a lot of distance to cover to either get to the bottom or the top, and or even across the mountain. So the strengths are that it prevents an early game death, and it prevents a storming situation where one group with fast mechs can just take over the whole table in no time. And it will split your army, meaning you're going to likely have more than one battle area to deal with. The weaknesses are that the players will likely avoid the mountain itself, and the battle will more or less take place around it, and playing on the edges of the table is never that nice. To improve the weaknesses, what you can do is make the mountain lower and wider, so that multiple mechs can easily have space on it and be in cover while fighting mechs on top of that mountain.
Secondly is the valley. It is characterized by having two well-protected bases on either side and only scatter in the center. The hotspots are the valley, ideally, and the amount of terrain needed is very low, only one big cover per side and some scattered terrains is needed. The game speed is very fast. Mechs should be able to take long distance shots from round 1. Game flow is locked. It might happen that mechs stay on their side and never cross the valley. Immersiveness is high. It's very likely scenario. The preferred mechs are well armored or fast. It can either take the punishment or run across the distance. The strength of this setup is that once mechs enter the valley, the game gets very intense and fast-paced. On the other hand, the weakness is that the player will avoid the center and attempt a long distance shots rather than move into the valley. So how we can improve the weakness? You can add more cover to the center and maybe allow cover size.
The next terrain type is the cross. This is characterized by having the large terrain pieces in all four corners, so that it creates an open cross shape going through the center and separating each of the 4 islands. The hotspots are essentially going to be each of the islands where medium to long distance shots are fired to other islands. The amount of terrain needed is low to medium. You're going to need at least 4 large pieces and then a little bit of scattered terrain in between. The game speed is relatively fast because you're going to build a bastion on each of your islands and then start firing. This can happen already in round 1. The game flow, however, might be quite choppy because the distance between each of the islands might never be covered. So it might be a standstill shooting gallery situation if the scatter terrain is not separated well enough. The immersiveness is relatively low. This does look like a board game, so it's not very immersive. It will prefer medium mechs or heavily armored mechs depending on how you're going to use the terrain. If it's just basically a bastion you shoot from, the heavily armored ones are going to be very powerful in this setup. The strength is that it gives each player very good starting positions, and it will fuel medium distance battles and prevent storming. The weakness is that the armies will very likely not mingle and situations can become very static. To improve the weaknesses, you can create secure quote-unquote bridges using scattered terrain between the islands so that mechs can move more easily to confront enemies on their own island. And you can make vantage points very small so that only a single mech can stand there. So if you want your full army to be available, then you will need to move into the cross section between the islands.
Next, the Equalizer. It is characterized by on-terrain pieces, exact mirrors to both sides. The hotspots are anywhere near and around terrain, and the amount of terrain needed is medium because you need each terrain piece twice in similar ways. The game speed is medium because a lot of terrain will be breaking line of sight. The game flow is fluent as there will be likely the multiple ways around the map, keeping the game dynamic. The immersiveness is low. It does not look very natural. It works best with cityscapes. The preferred mech are medium mechs and all-rounders because the situation may vary heavily. An adaptive mech is likely the best choice. The strength of Equalizer is very easy to balance and thus make it very good starting terrains. It is also easy to set up. However, the weakness is that it may not very interesting. Furthermore, equal opportunity doesn't mean equal strength, as this will not favor all mech types equally. So how to improve the weakness? We can add some variety to the terrain and make use of different heights to make the scenario more diverse.
Up next is the funnel. The funnel is characterized by bigger pieces along the center, leaving an opening somewhere near the center, and else you only have scattered terrain. So the hotspot is of course directly in the funnel, in that opening. The amount of terrain needed is medium, could also be a lot more depending on the size of your table. The game speed is very fast because the mechs can very easily see each other, and the hotspot is viewable and reachable from all sides. The game flow can be fluid or choppy depending on how well the scattered terrain is built up, because either the mechs all will flow directly to the funnel or they will try to evade it. The immersiveness is medium. You will very likely see something similar out there, but it still is kind of artificial. And the mechs preferred are of course well armored ones that create high damage because you want the funnel to be consistently shot at. The strengths are that it creates a very intense and very focused battle very quickly. The weaknesses are that it may lead into a stalemate situation if both players decide to lay a trap for each other on their side of the funnel. So you can improve the weaknesses by making the funnel into partial cover for several mechs, not just for one, and allow long distance shots through the funnel to force players to engage.
Next, the Cascade. It is characterized by on bigger terrain being somewhat interlinked. There is no line of sight from longer distances. The hotspots are anywhere, and the amount of terrain needed is high because you need to ensure that no space is left open. The game speed is low because mechs will likely make use of terrain to operate situation carefully. The game flow is fluent because proper placement can be easily achieved, but it's never 100% secure. Players will rarely make poor decisions. The immersiveness is medium because it is unlikely scenario. It works best with cityscapes or other artificial terrain pieces. The preferred mechs are fast or medium because moving from battle to assist other mechs is more important. The strength is that it will split the hotspots and create several smaller battles all over the map. This keeps the game interesting and tactical. The weakness is that it can create localized deadlocks if the mechs are too slow to change position. You can improve the weakness by making sure that all areas are easy to reach so that deadlocks can be more easily interrupted by other mechs. Also, you can Cascade in the way that there is a never full cover from all angles.
The last one is the natural. This is characterized by a very diversified game board. That means that each player has a very unique experience. That means that they have to adapt their strategies to their side of the game board in order to succeed. This really is more for advanced players. The hotspots are very unpredictable and completely depend on the strategies and the setup of the game board. The amount of terrain needed can vary from low to medium to high depending on the setup. The game speed is typically quite fast because each player will force their own idea, their own strategy onto the general game board. The game flow is typically quite fluent and the immersiveness is of course very high. The mechs preferred depend on the terrain and is rather unpredictable. The strengths are that it looks very, very good and can lead to vastly unpredictable situations and very interesting games with very different strategies on either side. The weaknesses is that it can create immensely single-sided battles because it's very difficult to balance. How to improve? You can create a minimum of symmetry. For example, if one side has a big mountain and the other side can have a couple of buildings. Use scatter terrain to avoid all too single-sided open spaces.
So those are the types of terrain setups, of templates that we have come up with. If you have your own, we would love to hear about these in the comments below. Now, a couple of warnings in general. The first one is, we already talked about this a little bit at the beginning, forests. Be very careful with forests. If you put one giant forest in the center of your game board, your game will basically become a crawling, slow, monotonous game. Also, don't put too many mountains to get over onto your board. Every mountain that needs to be climbed also slows down a mech. If you use gravel or any other kind of slowing mechanisms, use these only in very specific places where you want to purposefully slow down the game. So everything you do to slow down the game will work. It will slow down the game. If you do too much of it, you will end up with a very, very tedious experience. The next one is if you work with especially like large open areas that you could have in the natural setup or in the valley, always consider that this is a very, very big disadvantage for slower mechs. You can cope with this by adding scatter terrain. Right? We talked about this in the how to overcome some of the weaknesses, but always keep that in mind. If one player has fast mechs and one player has slow mechs, the disadvantages of the slow mechs is immense. They might not even be part of the action most of the game, which is for one of the players a very, very unsatisfying affair. Right? Always keep that in mind when you set these things up. That is pretty much all the information we can give you at this point. However, if you have further ideas or templates that you have not covered here, we would absolutely love to hear of these. Please do leave a comment below. Let us know how you set up your table, what's your favorite type of setup, and maybe we do a second video on this.
Yeah, and we hope that with all the information we gave you today, you will try something new and make the game maybe more fun, new experience, new setup. And please help us in the future by subscribe and like and comment our video.
Please do so. Like, every subscriber is helping immensely. Every like, every view is helping immensely.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, thank you for watching.
Thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye.
Bye.